just arrived in Cleveland. I don't know how much you know about Cleveland. But as somebody who has been in the paper in articles related to immigration and has gotten some comments on Cleveland.com, I know a bit about some of the pushback that, that here in Cleveland that we have relating to immigration. And that is, why do we need these people here? They're only going to take our jobs. We don't need them. We don't want them. I mean, I have read and experienced that. I don't know how widespread it is, but certainly all of us who are here know that there is some of that pushback in our community. So I want to ask you, what do we need to do in Cleveland, in Northeast Ohio, to help make the soil ready so that the immigrants can feel more welcome? And where do you start?
Thanks, Joy. Thank you so much for hosting us and bringing us here. Our work started in Tennessee, in Shelbyville, which was one of the communities we chose, and in Nashville. This whole idea of the soil came from the idea. Well, let me tell you what's seen in the film. You know, I'm very close to this film and the filmmaker and the process of the film, so it's hard for me to say what I know like every single line in the film, as I've seen it so many times. But the scene in the end, where Beverly is out watching the water flow over the dam, and talking about how she could have been, that person, or I could have been more, and just that empathy that she showed there at the end, compared to where she was in the beginning. That was, the idea of the welcoming initiative is this idea of having empathy for people in the U.S. born community. And so, because I had been involved in advocacy work, and we kind of dismissed people with fears about immigrants and immigration, and sort of saw them as people who were trying to pass laws that were bad, and so we had to stop them. But there were plenty of people who were good people who just had fears, and were not being reached out to in any way, and not being empathized with. And so for Cleveland and the Cleveland area, we talk about a welcoming spectrum when we do our work. There's some communities that are hostile, like Shelbyville was at the beginning, or unwelcoming. Some communities that are, and there's all in-betweens in different parts of the community. In your neighborhood, there's different parts of the spectrum. But if you look at an entire community, some communities tend to be still unwelcoming. Some are kind of more tolerant, and then some are actively welcoming. And we're trying to move everyone towards this idea of being actively welcoming. And certainly in Cleveland, there's less distance to go than there is in Shelbyville. Shelbyville's a sort of extreme example. But for Cleveland, there's going to be that need as well. There's a need to attract and to make policies and practices and overtures to the immigrant community, both in Cleveland, to make them feel like they're welcome and accepted. Overtures for people who are not in Cleveland to come here and see this as a place to be. But also overtures to what we call the receiving community, and having empathy for their fears. And the approach that we use is an approach that's borne out in this film. And there's actually on our website these different modules that the filmmakers made, Kim and Active Voice, that use clips from the film to talk about the different approaches that we use. And certainly three of the main approaches, and I'll stop with this, are lifted up in the film. And one is that contact piece that folks talked about. Contact between people in Cleveland, facilitating contact, really will need to happen. If immigration grows, that contact will need to grow as well. And that's a core part of the work, is when you meet someone and understand them, you can't have that same feeling of otherness and hatred, and so, or just fear, not always hatred. And then work around communications. And so, in Shelbyville, there's one newspaper, it's the Shelbyville Times-Gazette. So if you want to change the messages, get to that newspaper. And obviously the messages were not so good. But in Cleveland, it's more complicated, but still, whether you do it, we've done billboards and radio ads, but it can also just be the coverage of the local media. But getting the stories, not of the tiny percentage of people who are, say, committing crimes on the nightly news, but the 99.999% of the people who are contributing, who are immigrants, and giving back and want to be part of this community. And finally, leadership. And people like Richard and Global Cleveland is an example of leadership. People both who want to be involved in a welcoming initiative, there's a need to pull people in to do all sorts of different things to make an initiative successful, and then also people who are respected leaders in their ethnic community, or media leaders, or political leaders, stepping up and saying, you know, because people listen to their leaders. Everyone has different leaders, but people, you know who your leaders are, and you do listen to them and respect them. And if they're saying that it's good for Cleveland to be welcoming, and it's not good to be hateful, that people will listen to that, and that will inform the climate of a community. And so all those things need to be part of a strategy to create that fertile soil so that immigrants want to come here and want to stay here.